So please give John a nice warm welcome.
Thank you. Well, hello. So as he said, my name's John LeDrew. I'm an Agile coach, as well as doing kind of software engineering and consultancy probably for about 17 years now. Last October, I started, I didn't start. I had an idea for last October, a podcast. It wasn't called the Agile Path, it was just called my podcast. And I didn't have any content, didn't really know what I wanted to talk about. I knew that I wanted to do something creatively different from some of the other podcasts in the space, and those of you that have listened to it probably, will hopefully appreciate that it's different. It's up to you whether you like it or not, but definitely creatively different. But I really didn't know what topic I wanted to speak about. So I went along to Lean Agile Scotland. I didn't even really have a ticket. I was on the wait list, and then suddenly a ticket came up for one day, literally the morning or the evening before I went, and I went off at 5 o'clock in the morning and spent the day there. And I spoke to loads of people there. There's a really nice, it's a fantastic conference. They're running again this year in October again. I highly recommend it. It's probably easily one of the best Agile conferences in the UK, I think. There was a safety. Safety was this thing that everyone was sort of talking about, but not really talking about. So every topic, every time I spoke to anyone, almost all the talks that I saw had this underlying current, in the same way that this talk did, actually. This talk around the fire break. Sorry, getting the language right. Also had an undertone of this, and this was something that when I realised what it was, or I won't say I realised what it was, or realised that this seemed to be a thing, I started to ask people, what is this safety? And you said people didn't feel safe, an analogy that you gave, and people couldn't really describe it. They didn't have this idea as, you can kind of sense it, you can feel it, when a team's unsafe, you just know. And it was like, but it seems like it's the thing that's holding everything together. It's what's holding our teams together. It's like dark matter or dark energy in the universe. It's the thing holding everything together, but nobody knows what the damn thing is. And I wanted to find out more. So I actually thought it would be quite easy. It felt like a topic that hadn't really been covered or hadn't really been researched in much depth, certainly not explicitly relating to kind of agile teams or organizational teams. And it felt like it would be quite concise somehow. It wasn't. I'm just going to tell you this. It wasn't concise. It isn't concise. It's still ongoing. I ended up speaking to everyone. There are some very, very well-known people there who I was unbelievably honoured to have been able to spend a couple of hours chatting to, and a number of people that aren't well known, but are people that were ex-colleagues and kind of engineers and people I really wanted to try and gather the perspective of both people that have had to very consciously think about safety from a professional perspective, but also people that have experienced safety and unsafety, but not necessarily in a very conscious way. It's just they were aware of the feeling, perhaps, but they weren't necessarily aware, or a lot of the time they couldn't verbalize it. I also branched out away. A lot of these people are in the sort of software engineering industries, but people like Phelan McDermott, he runs he's a Olivier Award-winning director. He runs a theatre company called Improbable, and I knew about him because my father happened to work with him on an improvisation show, and I wanted to explore this relationship between improvisation and safety, because it seemed like there was some symbiosis there that I wanted to explore. So I ended up with 60 odd hours of audio. 38 interviews so far. There's still more coming. I keep people asking me they're interested in conversations, or I keep, for whatever reason, asking to interview more people, which only seems to add to my workload, really. But it's been brilliant. So one of the first things that I started to look into when I started to sort of dig around and look into the research and some of the things that came up conversations was a thing called Google's Project Aristotle. So Google wanted to find out what it was that made teams at Google, and they were focusing on Google-focused teams, but obviously this has relevance outside of that big multicolored organization, is they wanted to know, well, they've said, we've got some teams that aren't performing particularly well by their own internal measures, and they've got some teams that are doing brilliantly. What are the deciding factors? Why is this one team not doing well? Is it just what they could hypothesize, well, that team's got crappy people, all those people are just useless, and those people are brilliant. That's an easy hypothesis to make when you look at that. It's very easy to blame the people. Is that really what it is? And they did, I think there was something like 180 teams, I think they spoke to. They developed a whole specific measure for how to measure internally, how to measure what was considered a high-performing team within Google. And that included everything from inter-team relationships, so what does Team A think of Team B, for example, and what do certain high-level executives think about the delivery, how well are they delivering upon their own commitments, etc. And then they looked at why that was. So what they found out was that there were 5 key things. Now, there were actually a set of other things as well, and they're quite keen to suggest, and I highly recommend Google Aristotle project, and you'll find and see there's a lot more depth than I'm able to go into really in the work, and I highly recommend looking into it. But one of the things they found is essentially these 5 aspects and one key thing, which we'll get into at the end. So the first thing they did when they were going into it was they needed to work out what a team actually was. And it's kind of an interesting question. So I conveniently, because I switched to Keynote to do tonight because I wasn't sure about Wi-Fi and other things. And normally these bits don't appear yet, but no one can read them because the contrast isn't that great at this side, so it's fine. So I want to do a quick survey. How many people on a day-to-day basis, how many people actively work with more than one person? Is it? Okay, now when I say actively work with more than one person, I mean spend collaboratively, not sat on separate desks occasionally slacking each other, even though you're sat next to one another. I mean actually collaboratively working on something with someone for the majority of their day, at least one other person. So I'm seeing organizations pairing. If you're an engineer and you pair, that counts. That's actually collaboration. Okay. So it's an interesting thing. When they define what a work, they define these 2 things: a work group or a team. So they define a work group is something generally headed up by some sort of managerial hierarchy. So they've got a very clearly defined leader who sometimes has responsibilities over salary designation and other sorts of things, and can directly reflect the composition of that team. And they will generally work on their own, but will occasionally meet to share information. So that could sound like many Scrum teams that I've observed over the years. So think about it: a Scrum team of 5 people that occasionally meet once a morning for a 15-minute stand-up where they give an update, and a project manager who shouldn't really be there checks off the tasks on the list. So then there's that. So they find that as a work group, not a team. A bunch of people that are doing work for the organization, but they're not necessarily collaborating. Then you've got a team. So a team works together. They plan, they work, they solve problems together, they actively work together. And what's more is they are interdependent on one another. So this isn't a bad thing. This isn't about a team being non-resilient. This isn't about having a bus problem, that one developer that everybody's dependent on. No, the whole team needs to be present in order to do the work. You rely on one another because you're working together, because that's what a collaboration is. If you're actually collaborating with someone, then you do genuinely depend on the person that you're collaborating with. If you don't care about them, then it's not really collaboration. And that's what they define as a team. That's what collaboration really is. It's not 3 people working without making very much contact. So yeah, I did a completely unscientific survey on Twitter, about 100 responses, and this shows that the great majority, the 100 or so people that came back to that, I think about 60% were working completely on their own most of the time, by that definition. A nice chunk of people doing pairing. People part of I'm familiar with a number of people in the mob programming community, and a few people were kind of like, for goodness sakes, let's improve this. So I think that the mobbing got a little jump at the end when people saw they were a little depressed. But I think actually the suggestion that 15% of teams are mobbing is probably unrealistic in reality. So what actually makes a team great? So let's have a look at what Google thinks. So at number 5, we're counting down. One of the things that they said is that team members, the great teams, the teams that were performing really well in Google, team members felt that their work mattered or actually had impact on the organization. So they could see genuine change happening in what they were doing. That's actually surprisingly uncommon in organizations. And it ties kind of nicely into a study called the Chaos Study. And in the Chaos Study, they do it's an annual study. I think it's an annual study. And they essentially review a rolling kind of 10-year block of about 13,000 projects, kind of active software development projects. There are a bunch of controversies around the Chaos Study, the way that they define success, etc. Are kind of controversial. But one of the stats that come out of their research is this interesting statistic. There's 45% of features delivered are never used. This may be a stat that you've heard, but I would say, now when they say never, we're not talking about the backup feature that's only used once a year. We're talking about never used. If I was on a team and that team was delivering one of that 45%, I mean, really, we're talking about 1 in 2 features that the team deliver. That's not impact if the customers are never, ever using the code that we've sweated and worked on hard. So the next is meaning. The work needs to be personally important to them. They actually cared about the work that they were delivering. This does not mean that organizations need to be, that the only organizations that can possibly be have high-performing teams are organizations that are doing charitable work and saving people's lives. The NHS, for example. That does not mean there is meaningful work everywhere. People make meaning in the work, but they need to be given the right environment to do so. People take pride in delivering good quality work. People want to deliver good quality stuff. Teams and individuals, developers want to do good work. It might be surprising to hear, but most developers people are intrinsically motivated to deliver good work. And that's what drives meaning in the work, is just knowing that they can deliver quality. And again, that's frequently compromised in a lot of organizations. Structure and clarity. Team members need to know what the hell they're doing. I don't know how else to describe it. There are many, many, many organizations, and I've worked in so many companies where I have done a little survey where you go to the team members and you give them each a Post-it note and you say, I'd like you to write down what you think, anonymously, what you think the goal of this project is. It's kind of terrifying when you give that to 10 people and you get 10 different responses. They need to know what the hell they're doing. If you want people to have meaning and impact, they need to know what they're doing. They need to know why they are doing this stuff. They are not doing it just because a senior individual somewhere in another office that they've never met has shouted at someone. That's not meaning. That's not actually, well, that may well be clarity, but it's not the kind of clarity that team members need to perform well. Given all of those things, dependability, it's not really that surprising. The teams that are very, very successful, in Google at least, and in other organizations, are the ones that actually get stuff done. I wasn't overly surprised by this particular statistic, but one of the things that's interesting here is why they are getting things done. And one of the key separate, and it's actually from a separate study that I can't remember the name of, but Google did a separate study into good management. And one of the key things was the managers on teams that are getting stuff done are generally facilitative servant leaders. So they are helping and facilitating progress, and that's what they saw a core function of their role being. They were actually helping the teams get stuff done, as opposed to telling them what to do. It's an interesting, potentially. So, unsurprisingly, from the title of the talk, the number one thing is psychological safety in teams. When I say this is the number one thing, what they found was this was substantially more significant than all of the other 4 items that we've covered. In fact, where there was no psychological safety, there was none of the other things. That was the most destructive force that they found. A lack of psychological safety meant that pretty much all of the other elements were not performing well. So what is psychological safety? Why is it essential? So one of the key areas is that psychological safety in teams is essential because we don't like doing anything that could negatively affect people's perception of us. Now that could be our could be being shot halfway through a talk. They could not. We don't like people challenging our competence. So, for example, I could be on a team and they could be using a new testing framework that I've never used before, and I could go, mate, I've never used this framework before, and they go, the responses I could get could vary a little bit. So it could be, oh, that's fine, you can pair with me, we can sit down and look at it. Or it could be, what? You've never used it before? I mean, it's been around for like 5 years. Or I go, all right, fine, I'll just go and read the docs. It's fine, don't worry about me. That wasn't psychological safety. Awareness. So this is my awareness of what the hell's going on in the project. I could be sat in a meeting and we could all be sat there and I could go, excuse me, what are we trying to do here? And then you kind of get a look round because somehow you've lost track of things, but actually everyone else hasn't somehow, or they don't really want you to say that because maybe the only reason you lost track of things was because there was never clarity to begin with in the first place, but no one else wants to say that. So you don't want to be accused of being unaware or not having kind of awareness of the situation. And positivity. What about that you're on a project and there's that one guy that's like, this is just bullshit. They don't normally say it like that. It's normally kind of quiet. It's like, this is bullshit. The grumbly people that are kind of the naysayers on the project, the guys that always declare that stuff isn't going to go well or that next thing isn't going to work. And no one wants to be seen as that negative individual on the project. But at the same time, there are definitely appropriate times when you need to be able to say, this is bullshit. You need to be able to say that. And it should be safe to do so. So, psychological safety. Amy Edmondson did a study in, 1999. It took quite a long time. This really wasn't known about until Google's work, which is relatively recent, as far as the kind of wide knowledge anyway. So psychological safety is, in her definition, is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. When I first heard that, I thought that the words punished and humiliated seemed quite strong. Maybe I hadn't been in kind of the horrific environments that certainly once I started interviewing people, some of the stories that came out of that. But I definitely felt that that didn't tally up with me. As in, I was thinking, punishment, really? It's not like, your manager's sending you to your room for an hour, or, humiliation, it feels strong. It's not like the entire team is pointing and laughing at you because you admitted you didn't know how to use a testing framework or whatever it is. It's not as bad as that, surely. And no, it's probably not as bad as that, luckily, in most organisations, at least in England, where we're all too reserved to do anything as dramatic as that anyway. But what's interesting is actually, if you dig into the research and understand what they're talking about, is that this is a personal feeling. So, yes, sure, of course, your manager's unlikely to send you into the store cupboard for an hour to think about what you've just done. But if they decide to overlook you, if they decide to disregard you, if they decide to not give you the bonus that you were due to get potentially at the end of the year, that's still punishment, just not in quite the... And actually, as an individual, you're going to feel punished. It's that feeling that you have personally and how you feel, not about how it might be observed externally. And the same goes for humiliation. I might be able to laugh off not knowing that framework or being told to go and look at the docs, but actually that could be quite humiliating, especially if it's played out in front of the whole team. So, okay, the interactive bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about improvisation. For those of you that listen to the podcast, there is, as I mentioned, I interviewed a chap called Phelan, and there's a fantastic symbiosis between improvisation and the way that we work or would like to work creatively in a safe environment. So we're going to do some. So what I'd like to talk about first, no, I won't go with that. Yeah, I'm just going to skip forward because I know we're short on time. So let's just talk about what improv is. So one of the key ideas of improv is that, just put your hands up. Who knows what improvised theatre is? Has anyone done any improv theatre before? Have you at least seen it? There's all like, whose line is it anyway, or something like that. Okay, someone's done some improv theatre. I'm not going to pick on people. It's a safe environment. Yeah. So the core ideas behind improv. There's this core, what I've heard, I quite like referred to as the yes and muscle. So what this means is when someone in an improv exercise suggests an idea, it's accepted. Okay, now what that means is that, and I've heard this described separately, is you just need to suspend your disbelief. This idea, whatever craziness they might be saying, is a good idea. Pretend that it's a good idea. It doesn't matter if it's completely insane, but you just accept it. And means that you take that idea and you develop it yourself. So you add to that, you extend that idea and work with it. What's important here is that you avoid blocking. So the point here in the example that Phelan gives in the podcast is that you can have a situation where someone might come, knock on the pretend imaginary door and say, "Hi, darling, I'm home. It's your wife," or whatever. And then they go, "You're not my wife, you're the doctor." At which point the story ends. You could play with that, I guess, but it doesn't provide a free flow of ideas and imagination. So what the important thing is to work with what you were given and add to it. So in order to do that, you need to pay attention to your fellow performers. You need to make sure you're expanding upon what they have offered you and not creating an environment that stymies creativity. Do you think that is something that you could rephrase into a lot of work environments, in my opinion? There we go. So the first exercise is for everybody. There will be a few exercises afterwards. So firstly, I'd like everyone to stand on their feet and to find themselves a partner. Even better if you have no idea who they are and have never met them before. But for time purposes, you don't need to wander around. So find yourself a partner. I'd like you to stare at each other face to face and stand, a few feet apart, just a few feet apart. I'd like you to start by smiling at one another. Smile at one another and try and hold that smile, because smiling is something that's going to open up parts of your brain that you would not have been using previously. It might be weird to smile at someone you don't know. It's like that awkward moment when you're commuting and you catch someone's eye. You can stare romantically into each other's eyes if you want to, but it might feel awkward, but that's also okay. So, what I'd like you to do is to hold your hands up in front of one another and to mirror each other's activity. Move incredibly slowly and start to move your hands, and imagine that one of you is the mirror and one of you is the actor. You need to work out a way of communicating to one another without speaking that allows you to transfer control to one another without it being obvious. Imagine you're trying to do that without it being obvious to an external observer who's currently controlling. It's much easier if you move very, very slowly. You can also bring in facial expressions, maybe shoulder movements, nostril flares, ear wiggles. If you can both wiggle your ears, that would be amazing. I can't.
I can't do that.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So I'd like you to, before you sit down, just raise your hand if you felt that you actually had that kind of symbiosis, that you felt you were able to switch control in a way that was fairly seamless. I'm just gonna pick someone close to the stage. How about you two? Could you come up onto the stage if that's all right?
And we're going to sit down. Thank you for that.
So what I'd like you to do is to do the exercise again. Now, while they're doing the exercise, I'd like you to see if you can work out who's in control and who isn't. Just in your mind, see if you can.
It's got to be worth the photo and the tweet, yeah.
Really try and focus. Really good.
Shape shifting.
Oh, it's hard to tell, isn't it? Oh, it's... All right, can anyone tell? Who did?
Well, Chris must be power drunk, so it must be him.
Okay, exactly. So did anyone else see? They've swapped 4 times, apparently. Anyone else notice? I think they're pretty good. All right, thank you very much. So that's a warm-up exercise. It doesn't have the same sort of meanings, I suppose, that some of the later exercises we'll look at. But one thing that I really love about this exercise is it's really about learning to observe one another. You really need to focus very, very closely on one another, both if you're trying to work out if who's in control at that particular moment, but also when you're just working together. It's an interesting exercise. Right, so this is my most favourite exercise ever. So in String of Pearls, we're going to tell a story. So the story will start, I'm going to say here. I'm wondering if we're going to run out of stage and it's all going to get a bit health and safety hazardous, but we'll see what happens. It's not the wrong kind of safety you're talking about. So we're going to start a story here, and someone is going to come up and tell a sentence that begins the story. The story will then end here, and someone else is going to come up and tell us a sentence that ends the story. During the game, what we will do is people will come up and fill in the gaps that join those 2 sentences together. So we will know how the story starts, and we'll know how it ends, but we won't know how those 2 things connect. And people will come up and suggest ideas and bring in, and we'll build up the story one step at a time. Each time we add an extra piece to the story, we repeat the whole line again until we have something that, as a group, we have decided is cohesive enough to form something that makes sense. I tend to describe it as, it will make a lot of sense in the universe that we will create here together. But we're not going to be writing a novel that would necessarily, well, we might all buy it. It's going to be great. So do I have any volunteers to start the story off? Anyone have any ideas? Just a sentence? Yeah, go ahead. Take your place. I'm going to jump down, actually. So how does the story begin?
No matter how many recipes that Eva looked at, she could never find a meal where she had all the ingredients in stock.
All right, so we have a start. How's Eva's story going to end? So go right to the other end, other side over there, and then.
Are we ending it?
Yeah, you're ending the story. So that's. Oh no, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So we do the beginning and the end first. You technically have.
And that's how she painted her house.
Hey! Okay, so now what we do is that if you say that line again, so you say your bit and he says, and he repeats the same line. You're going to have to say it quite a few times.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah. No matter how many recipes Eva looked at in her book, she could never find one where she had all the ingredients in stock.
And that's how she painted her house.
I think we already have a story. I don't know how, but yeah. So, does anyone have anything we can inject in the middle of this story? Any ideas? Yeah, just sort of wander up towards the stage. Fine.
So she decided to telephone her best friend to see if they had any inspirational ideas for what she should cook.
All right. So read the line again, and then we continue. We already have. Yeah, you're gonna have to say it again and again and again.
No matter how many recipes Eva looked at in her book, she could never find one where she had all the ingredients in stock.
So she decided to telephone her best friend to see if they had any inspirational ideas for what she should cook.
And that's how she painted her house.
Oh my God. All right. So we've got a house painter. Yeah, here we go. Someone else.
Unfortunately, none of them knew it, had any idea about what they could cook because their house painting dogs had eaten all the ingredients.
Oh, here we go. House painting dogs. I'm slightly terrified as to what they paint the house with after they've eaten all the ingredients, but we'll see what happens. So read the story, read the line again, please.
No matter how many times Eva looked at the recipes in her book, she could never find one which had all the ingredients, where she had all the ingredients in stock.
So she decided to telephone her best friend to see if they had any inspirational ideas for what she should cook.
Unfortunately, they had no idea what she could cook because their house painting dogs had eaten all the ingredients.
And that's how she painted the house.
I think that you could argue that there was a story there, but I'd like to know a little more about the house painting dogs. So who can explain how this works? Because I think it could go in a number of directions, some of which are kind of disgusting. So we can see what happens. Any ideas? House painting dogs? Does anyone even know what house painting dogs are? How are we going to do it? How are we going to make this connection? As a team, we need to do this together. We've got a high responsibility to deliver a product in the next few minutes. Oh, here we go.
There are not many dogs that can paint houses, but these ones use their tails.
Yeah. There we go.
No matter how many times she looked at the recipes in her book, Eva could never find one where she had all the ingredients in stock.
So she decided to telephone her best friend to see if they had any inspirational ideas for what she should cook.
Unfortunately, they had no idea what she could cook because their house painting dogs had eaten all the ingredients.
There aren't many dogs that can paint houses, but these ones use their tails.
And that's how she painted the house.
Hey, and it is formally recognised. We cheer at the end, so thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to ask first. So, what do you think we told an interesting story? So that's a fairly relative question, but what do you think? Was it interesting? Was the story in all of its weirdness interesting in the sense? And was that exercise engaging? We find it engaging? Yeah. Even though it was kind of crazy, why was it? What made it engaging? Why were people interested in this silly activity? Sorry, go.
I was interested in what other people's ideas would be to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Yes, similar to what Luke said, it was grabbing the middle piece. So you knew the beginning, you knew the ending, so it insightful look at what was happening in the middle.
So any other comments on the exercise around engagement?
There's something about a narrative, however incomplete it is, that engages.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think these are the key things that I tend to take away from this. So one of the key things that it's totally safe for anyone to say what the hell they want in this exercise, whether you're talking about house painting dogs or recipes or whatever. Anyone can kind of suggest whatever they want in this exercise. You're not going to get laughed down. We just work with it. You give us an idea and we somehow fill in the gaps around it. Everyone also has autonomy. So people that don't want to take part in this, they don't have to. That they're allowed to sit back and say, I don't really feel comfortable with this. And that's actually really important with a large number of exercises, especially things like the fire break activities and kind of autonomous activities like 20% time that organisations have. A lot of organisations make it clear that you're not forced to collaborate with everyone. You're not forced to sort of self-organise, because that kind of, it can certainly negate how comfortable people feel in the activity. And it's also safe to fail. There's a very good chance that a story that we produce just is not going to go anywhere. We were quite efficient actually this evening, which is good because we were running out of stage space and it was all going to get kind of dangerous. There's certainly times where I've done this where it's you've got 8 or 9 people there and the story's going off in all sorts of directions. And so here's an interesting question. We created an environment in this little section, this little moment that we had as a group, where it was safe to contribute ideas, where we worked together towards a common goal, and we were all engaged actively in that task. Firstly, how many people, let's say in the last year, has experienced that on a task at work? I guess. Fire break guys, definitely in that environment. But how many people in the last year have actually, and how many people have probably experienced that more than once? And how many people have experienced that at least once in their entire careers? More than once in their whole careers? so it's not surprising some of the people I know working in sort of the agile space who are trying to create those sorts of environments have experienced it, but that's interesting. Okay, so we're going to do another exercise. So to begin with, this has always been a slightly experimental one for me, so we'll see how it goes. Could I get a volunteer to begin with? And to begin with, any volunteer? I'm going to need 4 eventually. Well, yeah, 4 eventually. So could I get someone to come up? Okay, so I want to introduce you to Alex. I know that's probably not your name, but Alex, along with the other people that we're going to see this evening, work in a nuclear reactor. Yeah, it's quite a high responsibility job, and you are now 10 hours into an 8-hour shift. And unfortunately, you were kind of tired. Yeah. And while you were tired and distracted, you might have knocked the big red button that exists in all nuclear reactors. That's the, destroy this hemisphere of the Earth button. I don't know. If you just look at Hollywood, they all have the big red button. It's true. So, yeah, so unfortunately, it says northwest of England because it was first done in Warrington, this exercise, but I think we could take out the northwest from here if we try hard enough. So yeah, unfortunately, you pressed the big red button. So before I want to tell you something that they can't hear. So in the exercise in general, whenever you hear the word button, red, anything like that, you're going to get pretty defensive and start blaming anyone else. Okay, what the hell, I don't want to hear about buttons. Okay. All right, so could I get another volunteer, please? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. It's okay. You're next. So, all right, so this is Bailey, everyone. Hello, Bailey. All right, so Bailey, so Bailey, you are 2 hours late for your 8-hour shift. And you're pretty annoyed, Alex, for pressing the button. You've come in and the world is about to end. And you were 2 hours late because you were up looking after your sick child. Okay, so you were up most of the night, and then you needed to get a bit of kit. Okay, but either way, you were 2 hours late, and that's kind of crappy. But we'll see how that turns out. Yeah, sorry, So, can I get another volunteer? Yeah. All right. So this is Devon. Hello, Devon. Devon is their manager. And you hate conflict, okay? You just cannot cope with conflict at all, okay? So I need to tell you something in secret before. So could you go over there, please, guys? So I should have told you this before. So any mention of lateness, children being ill, I don't know, anything that could potentially direct blame at you, you're like, whoa, okay, defensive, all right? That's the only rule. So you? You hate conflict, so any mentions of anything that might cause conflict, so buttons, lateness, anything that could do that while this is going on, you get you just want to stop the conversation, you just don't want it to go there, all right? So one last volunteer, please. Anyone know anything about nuclear power stations? It's useful because this guy's the expert. Anyone? One last person? It's actually the easiest job. One last person. Hey! Okay, this is Perry, everyone. So this is Perry. You're the expert, so actually you can come down here. I'll explain why in a second. So you're the expert. You're the only person that actually knows how to solve the problem, but there's an unfortunate fact is that this is the containment area that they're all stuck in. You can only talk to them through the radio, and you're the only one that knows how to fix it, okay? So I'll tell you how to fix it. So the only way they can fix the problem is to press the red, green, and blue buttons all at the same time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what you need to try and communicate to them. All right, so there is another interesting complication, which is that you all have 2 minutes to live. I think technically so do we, unfortunately. So what we're going to do now is, I will say, because I realised I didn't have any Post-it notes. Are there Post-it notes around? Post-its? I don't know, I normally have Post-its, but that's all right. So, no, amazingly, we're at an Agile meetup and there are no Post-its to be seen. So, for now, there is a red button right there. All right, people? In our world, there's a red button in the middle. There's a green button over here. And there's a blue button there. That's all you need to know. So, I think the clock needs to start. So you guys need to solve this problem. Oh, Post-it notes. There we go. All right, so in our world, this pink is red. This pink is blue, and this pink is green. All right, there we go. So we're going to start this off. So just basically, you guys are trapped. There's an alarm going off. There's all kinds of noise, and you've got 2 minutes to live. So just put yourself in that character. So how are we going to solve it? So you are obviously taking the lead here.
Hello, team. Let's sort this out, eh?
Hello.
Hello. This is easy, guys. Let's do this right now. What I'd like you to do is press the 3 buttons together at once.
First of all, Perry, it wasn't my fault for pushing the red button. Not at all.
Whose fault was it? Who pressed the button?
Definitely not mine, Avery.
Guys, hang on.
Stop shouting, please. Let's just talk.
Guys, loving the energy. Just press all 3 buttons at the same time.
Yeah, but Perry, are we really going to die? I didn't push a button, so it's not my fault. So if I die, it's not my fault. I'll go to heaven, it's fine.
Let's just give it a go.
Not my fault.
Whose fault is it?
Bailey, shut up, please.
Answer the question, whose fault is
Can you stop arguing, please?
Whose fault do you think it is?
It doesn't actually matter.
No, but whose fault is it? And then we'll press the button.
Who wants to live? Please press the button. All at the same time, together.
Don't fancy it, to be honest, Perry. Definitely do amazing, and she's patronising me. I'm new, I'm on probation.
Whoever pushed the button can push the button again.
Just a while
You've
back.
already pushed one button, so go on. One more button.
Easy,
Won't
my
do.
Can we calm down, please? Stop arguing.
Well, it wasn't your job to press the first button. But
10 seconds.
Hey, Devon, could you perhaps press 2 buttons?
Last 10 seconds, what you fancy before we die?
Pretty please?
5,
I'll press the button if you press
4.
the button first.
Shotgun, not me.
Please?
3, 2.
Bye.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, so you're all dead. Sorry, guys. Thank you very much. Okay, so I like this exercise more the more I do it. So this is an interesting exercise. So what do we think was going on there? Obviously, I'd gone and whispered little nuggets to each of the team that, well, I guess some people heard, some people didn't. But what do you think was happening there? Why weren't they able to just collaborate around what was a really simple task? And I know this was an exaggerated, overblown situation somewhat, but why were they struggling? Why was it so hard for them to collaborate?
The overriding factor is that someone there's got self-interest in something they may or may not have done, and wants to deny it, and it seems at all costs.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that sometimes when you talk to people that they actually do take ownership of those sometimes bad ideas and don't want to let go of them.
Why do people get defensive? Why are people defensive?
You don't feel safe?
Well, yeah, you could guess that, couldn't you? But why do you think? Why do actually people get defensive? Why do I feel? When do I get into that? Being attacked. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So why would they? Now, in this context, they weren't actually obviously being attacked by anyone. As in, there wasn't anyone like saying, "Oh, it was your fault. It was your fault," other than each other. You know, they were naturally falling onto that. One of the things that I find in organisations is that I had a really fascinating conversation with Tim Ottinger recently to lead up to our next episode, which is on blame as it happens. And he spoke about this thing called the doppelganger effect, which is that in organisations you sometimes have this sort of defensive behaviour, this kind of arse-covering behaviour from individuals, when actually there isn't an obvious source of the blame. You look at the team and you're thinking, it's not like people are finger-pointing, but people are obviously really, really worried to admit that they've made a mistake or to sort of just, it's almost the blame is irrelevant actually in these contexts. The blame doesn't really matter. The personal accountability is irrelevant. It's about the problem. You know, right now, all they needed to do was press these 3 damn buttons, but they were so consumed by the blame and the situation that they were actually, you know, completely unable to move forward with it. And with the doppelganger effect, what he found is that you would talk to people and they would say, so why are you afraid? You know, why are you worried about, you know, it seemed like you were being quite defensive in that last meeting we had. And he'd ask them kind of candidly, say, and they would say, oh, the management, they just generically say the management, that people, they have an issue. And he would think, and he's sort of thinking, well, he's working as a consultant in an organisation. He knows there's management support for this. He knows the management are trying to encourage, removing the blame culture. And yet, there's still this problem. And then you find out that historically there was a manager, or there was an individual that sometimes these people haven't even met, but they leave a kind of memory, a footprint of their previous behaviour that can affect the way people behave. And it's a really interesting problem that within organisations, and the way that I think it's very important. Now that is obviously potentially a kind of a weird situation, but I think a lot of organisations have past managers that have created environments and blame-driven environments that maybe don't exist anymore, or perhaps don't have the same amount of influence as they once did. But actually, blame can happen very easily. In this case, the blame wasn't really being directed, but people were just blaming because it was an easy way to distract the attention from the problems that they were aware of themselves causing. So what happened here? Blame caused defensiveness. Individuals felt uncomfortable with their very human mistakes. Actually, Bailey was late with their children. The kid was sick. They weren't going to come in any earlier. That was just the fact. They were there at home with their child. Alex was exhausted, and he made a mistake. These things happen. But they were uncomfortable with the fact that these were just mistakes. These weren't really blameworthy in a lot of ways. You could say it's your fault, but really, what could you do? It's like probably the following day they would make the same mistake again, given a 2 hours into a 10-hour shift or a sick child. When you avoid conflict altogether, when you try to disperse that conflict and you don't address it, all you do is stop progress and stop collaboration. There are many teams that I've worked with where you have this surface agreement where you look at the team and everyone seems to kind of agree with each other. Someone says, hey, what about this? And everyone's, yeah, that's a brilliant idea. And yet they don't agree, really. And then you hear, stuff in the corridor afterwards, oh, what a stupid idea that was, for goodness sakes. And you have this stuff that happens under the surface because no one actually feels comfortable raising conflict in a safe environment. And you need safety to have healthy conflict. Okay, so what is safety? I have sort of redefined what I see safety as. You're safe when you can speak your truth, raise your concerns, and give and receive constructive feedback without humiliation, rejection, or punishment. I wanted to add a bit more definition to the original one, and I find that is the most important thing. I want to be authentic. And that's what speak your truth means. Individuals need to be able to be authentic to themselves, say what they are thinking, and speak their own truth. They need to be able to raise concerns. If a project is going wrong and they have concerns, you want people to say it. Project managers in the room, I imagine there's 1 or 2 of you. How many people have been frustrated by perhaps slightly later than they would have liked reported risk on a project? What do you mean? When did you know about this? Really? What? You mean, so I'm now going to have to go and tell my manager that we're going to be late because of this thing that you could have told me 3 months ago? Oh, for goodness sakes, why didn't you? This isn't an uncommon conversation. And receive constructive feedback. So people need to be able to give and receive feedback to each other. You need to be able to tell someone that their behaviour is inappropriate in that moment, respectfully, but it still needs to be done. And the same thing, that people need to be safe to receive that. That's possibly one of the hardest elements of this, I think, for a lot of people. People, interestingly, feel far less comfortable giving feedback than they do receiving it a lot of the time. But actually giving feedback, genuine feedback in a way that doesn't immediately make someone jump into defensiveness and comes across as blame is quite challenging. Okay. So I want to talk about what I consider to be the core of this for me. There are many, many ways. If you do look up Project Aristotle, they have a whole pages of specific things you can do, specific activities you can do to try and help foster safety. All of those things are good ideas. But the one thing that I felt that they miss really in that, and it's not really something they're missing, is that for me, I think that you need to learn to recognize unsafety. You need to recognize safety in your team. And a lot of people are actually very unaware of how safe their team is and how safe they are and how safe the organizations are. So I call this paying attention. For me, the first level of paying attention, this is you. This is you in the organisation, this dot. And it's what I call experiential safety. So this is paying attention to how you are in that particular moment. You're in a meeting and you're saying, hang on, wait a sec. Why do I feel unable to contribute to this meeting? What is actually causing that? And it's about being mindful and understanding how you're feeling in that particular moment and being kind of open to have that little inner dialogue with yourself about what's going on. Then you've got what I call extrinsic safety. So this is your circle of influence, and this is the team and people that you work with directly on a day-to-day basis, the people that you can observe interacting with one another and interacting with you. And this is about not only recognizing how an individual might make you feel and thinking, wait a sec, they said that thing to me, or why do I feel I can't communicate with that individual over this person? But also when you notice unsafety between individuals, when you think, wait a sec, you know, Bob was really vocal in this meeting, he was contributing, and then someone said something to him and now he's not anymore. Maybe something's up there. And just being aware of it, that does not mean that you might address that directly with these individuals, but at the beginning, just being able to start to pay attention to these things will really, really benefit you as an individual learning about what safety is and how people interact and team dynamics. And then you've got the environmental safety. Environmental is the rest of the organisation. This is everyone outside of your direct team. In some respects, the environmental could be what we spoke about, like the doppelganger effect, for example, things that are outside the rest of the organisation, outside the rest of the team, but they affect implicitly the way that everyone else interacts. This could be particular policies that make it. It could be, crazy organisations that stack rank the entire staff, for example. That if organisations have policies that pit individuals against one another, that doesn't provide does not provide a safe environment, and that's going to affect down the tiers, down to how you feel personally, and also how your team and you interact. So this is hierarchical. This is obviously always affecting inwards. There is far less. Your influence gets less and less as you work out through these layers. Most individuals, regardless to some degree of the level, unless that person happens to be, a leader in the organisation, in which case that automatically gives them more influence over the environment that they're creating. It's unlikely that you're going to have vast amounts of influence, but you do have the influence over this first tier. Everyone has the ability to observe how they are feeling in the situation and how other people feel in their team. And then the next step to that is to learning how to address those things and to raise them. Once you notice unsafety, it's about raising that up and saying, hang on, wait a sec, what's going on here? That is terrifying. That's a scary thing to do, and a lot of people are unable to do it. And in some cases, the organisation, the environmental level of the organisation, it's not even possible. When I was talking to Mary Poppendick, she basically highlighted it as, well, there are lots of organisations that you could choose to work in, basically. And there are situations when there are going to be organisations, if you are not in a position of influence in those organisations, that frankly, there are better places to be. And I'll be open about saying that. There are definitely things you can do to help improve those organisations, and perhaps just raising awareness of safety within your group, within your team, that could really be a benefit of you day to day. But at the end of the day, the organisation may well not follow suit with that. That's the tale of many agile transformations, I think. So what I love this quote. So this is a quote from a guy, an artist. He was from the 20th century artist, American artist called Robert Henry even. The object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state that which makes art inevitable. How I see this is about you build the environment to create successful teams. Successful teams thrive in the right environment. If you have an environment that fosters safety, that encourages collaboration, that encourages communication, success kind of just happens. The good stuff just comes out of that. People will collaborate. Give an environment like the firebreak environment that you created. You took a bunch of people, took them out of their normal environment, put them in an environment that encouraged collaboration, and you had success. You probably had more projects delivered in that 2 weeks than you've ever delivered in the entire history of NHS Digital. I'm being Perhaps overly negative there, but I'm only going from my own experience of some government organisations. But that was a very, very highly productive couple of weeks if you look at the overall output, and that's because of the environment that was created. So I'd like to talk a little bit about another aspect of this. So what I try to talk about here is what safety is, how we can potentially try to grow to achieving it, and why this thing's really important. And it goes a lot further than just being important because organisations can be more productive. That's great, isn't it wonderful? The economy will go up if we have more safety, but I think there's a lot more depth to this than that. So this is US stats. This is taken from the Gallup Daily poll. Who's heard of the Gallup poll? Gallup are an organisation. They do a huge amount of research into workforce engagement, a whole bunch of other things, how popular Trump is, or random things like that. But one of their key things is this Gallup Daily poll they do. So every day they contact about 1,500 employees or workers across the states. They do this in multiple countries, but for me, I wanted to draw a correlation to a bunch of other statistics, and this was the most useful data for me just because I had data for a particular time period. But these stats are loosely similar across the world. So they've done this research internationally, and this is pretty much the same. Give or take 5% or so. I think it's pretty much equal internationally. So what this shows us is that only 35% of our workforce are actually engaged in what they do. So what that means is, and they define engagement to be having an opportunity to do what they do best each day, having someone at work who encourages their development and believing their opinions count. Now, I want to ask a question. From what we've just learned about safety, how much of that is possible in an unsafe organisation, out of interest? You think it's possible to be engaged if their safety isn't there? I mean, having opinions that count, I don't think I would have any opinions in an unsafe organisation. Why would you? You're not going to raise anything, are you? Having an opportunity to do what they do best each day, might possibly, maybe be able to do that. Would you really do your best if your best could be criticised, so you could be humiliated for it? I don't know. I think you might be a step down from that. And there's another stat. 66%. It's interesting. 65% of the US workforce is disengaged. 66% of the US workforce claims that, or 66% of the US workforce consider work to be a somewhat or significant source of stress in their lives. And 47% of that group, 46% of that group, claim to have lost patience with their children, shouted at their spouse. This is 2/3 of the US workforce, while stressed, experiencing workplace stress, and they are going home and shouting at the kids. Roughly 1 in 2 of them are going back. So this is roughly, to put it into numbers, roughly 98 million people, roughly 40, 50 million people in the States, I think, roughly, who say, yeah, regularly, when I'm feeling stressed, I scream at my kids, or I get into, I'm shouting at my spouse. 1 in 2 people. Again, this is a stat that's pretty much consistent internationally. Roughly, I think it was 55-60% in Europe. There's a European study. There was 14.9 million days. 11.8 million. Sorry, I'm using a different stat there. 11.8 million days, sick days taken specifically attributed to workplace stress in the UK in 2016. That is. So, I think there's a relationship here. I think that there isn't a coincidence that there is 65% people who claim to be stressed and 66% of people claim to be disengaged, and vice versa. So I did some research and I discovered this thing called the JDR model. Who's heard of the JDR model? It's a relatively well-known study by a guy called Arnold Backer. So what this shows us is that he posits that every job that you might do has demands, and these are pretty static, but generally will vary depending on the role in place. So, for example, there's going to be things like emotional demands. If I work as a nurse in a hospice, I'm going to have pretty high levels of day-to-day emotional demands on me. Just the fact that I'm dealing with people that are, that are dying. if I'm a software engineer, I'm probably going to have high levels of mental demands on me. If I'm a bricklayer, it's going to be high levels of physical demands. But they aren't necessarily going to vary. That's going to be kind of consistent, as in, the amount of that work isn't going to change. Yeah, sure, there are also things like work pressure. That's going to be environmental and can vary depending on the kind of industry. So if you're working as a stock trader, for example, and you're dealing with high levels of massive transactions, you're going to probably have higher levels of pressure just relating to the weight and the impact of the decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis. But they're pretty consistent. You then bring into that job resources. So job resources are things that support you in your role. So that could be being given autonomy. Autonomy is a really important factor to how well you deal with the stress and the demands of the work. Sorry, I know we're running over, and I think I'm running over. So that could also include things like having a coaching relationship with your manager. That will support you and raise you up. Good feedback, regular feedback. So what happens is that the job demands, they lead to an increased workplace stress. Workplace stress eventually leads to exhaustion, cynicism, burnout, and all of those factors. This study actually was originally specifically focusing on burnout as a thing. And when they define burnout, we're talking about someone who's essentially completely incapacitated from work, not just, oh God, I can't cope with this anymore, I'm burned out. We're talking about the very much medical definition of what burnout would be. This is someone at home not able to do their job for a significant period. And job resources, they increase your engagement. So what I find interesting here is that we've looked at workplace stress, we've looked at engagement separately, and there is this link between these two things in this model. What this highlights is that when I'm engaged, I have greater resilience to workplace stress. Workplace stress is always there, but while engaged, this negates the effect of workplace stress or on the job demands to increase workplace stress. And this shows as well, so in the study, I think he was working with Inbank in the Netherlands, what they actually showed was that when they measured this, there was a definitive link to individuals having lower levels of stress, higher levels of engagement directly to organizational outcomes. So this is literally, profit, money they're making. I've also added on here separately personal outcomes, because to me, if I am burned out and I can't work anymore, sure, I'm not contributing to the revenue that the organization is making, but that's quite a negative personal outcome for me, for me specifically. You also have this idea of personal resources. So these are things that you bring personally. If you have an optimistic temperament, you are going to have somewhat higher resilience to these sorts of things just because of your natural temperament. And there's a lot of studies around optimism and those sorts of things in the workplace. Self-efficacy, if I'm highly competent, I'm also going to feel more capable to deal with the work demands that are put on place. My own personal levels of stress resilience, etc. So the key important thing for me, and a story that I use to try and describe this, is imagine the last time you were up late working for a deadline that your boss was insisting upon, and how you felt about that, and how positive you felt about that. You're basically up late, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you've got a presentation to do or some code to finish or a project to deploy. You're not normally particularly happy about that situation. This is a stressful situation to be in. And all of those demands that are there anyway are going to affect you quite significantly. And then on the other hand, you've got another circumstance, the time where you sat down, wanted to do some work in the evening. Maybe you're still at work, you haven't gone home yet, but you're working on a project. Maybe you're working with someone else. Who knows, maybe you're even pairing, God forbid. And you look up at the clock and, oh God, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even notice that time go by. Wow, we got a lot done though, didn't we? You leave feeling engaged, feeling energized, probably still buzzing with ideas in your head because you're still going, you're still engaged in the work. And you don't feel stressed. Yeah, sure, you're tired. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You probably felt tired the second you noticed the clock. But you're not. But in both of those circumstances, you've technically worked the same number of hours you've been in there. You're under the same sorts of situation. You're working on whatever that project might be. But because you were engaged in the work, because the environment was there to help you be engaged in the work, you didn't feel the stress. And there's a lot of research that backs this up. This is quite old now, this study. I think this is sort of early thousands. And there have been other studies that show a huge amount of benefit, really, from this and this relationship. So I think the key thing to remember is that I think if we were to improve engagement, improving safety, improving engagement, maybe, possibly, workplace stress would go down. Maybe. But even if it only went down by a little bit, I don't know. There's 50 million people in the US, 98 million even in the US that are affected by workplace stress. Let's assume it's roughly the same in the UK. We have a similar size workforce, actually. You know, you're talking about still, what I think it's about, would be about 40 million in the UK, if I remember the statistic correctly. So yeah, I think that safety is the #1 indicator of an effective team. There've now been a whole bunch of studies separate from the Google work that has been done that can show that. This is really, really important stuff. But this is more than just how effective our teams are and how profitable our organizations are. This is about the greater society. This is about changing our relationship to work completely, having organizations that don't punish people for being human beings and respect that creating creating safety in the organization is absolutely the core of what organizations should be trying to do to be effective. If you need creativity in your organization, and I will guess that pretty much any organization that's doing pretty much anything these days needs people to be creative, then you need safety, and you need to put that up. So I'm going to end on a quote from Arlo. Arlo Belshi is an Agile coach from the States. Safety is a very profound thing. Not being emotionally abusive in the workplace sure would make the world a different place. Thank you.